The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan as Captain Sarah Mitchell walked toward the most feared aircraft in the U.S. Air Force arsenal. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, sat on the tarmac like a sleeping beast, its massive 30mm GAU-8 cannon jutting from its nose like a metallic fang. This wasn't just any ordinary day for Sarah. It was the day she would either prove herself worthy of flying the military's most legendary close air support aircraft, or become another cautionary tale whispered in pilot-ready rooms across the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 2012, and the military had only recently opened combat aviation roles to women. Sarah Mitchell was among the first wave of female pilots assigned to fly the A-10, a decision that sparked heated debates in military circles. The Warthog wasn't just any aircraft, it was a tank killer, a ground pounder's guardian angel, and a symbol of American air superiority that had earned its stripes in conflicts from the Gulf War to Iraq and Afghanistan. Many seasoned pilots and military officials questioned whether women had the physical and mental fortitude to handle such a demanding and dangerous aircraft. "She'll never make it through the training," whispered Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, a grizzled A-10 instructor pilot with over 3,000 hours in the cockpit. The Warthog isn't like those pretty little fighters. This is a beast that'll chew you up and spit you out if you're not tough enough. His words echoed the sentiments of many old-school aviators who believed that close air support was too dangerous and demanding for female pilots. Sarah had heard these doubts before. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she had dreamed of flying since she was 8 years old, when her grandfather, a World War II B-17 bomber pilot, took her to an air show. The roar of jet engines and the precision of aerial demonstrations captivated her imagination. But even then, adults would smile condescendingly and suggest she might prefer to become a flight attendant instead. "Flying is a man's job, sweetheart," her high school guidance counselor had said. "Maybe you should consider something more suitable." But Sarah was not one to be deterred by doubt. She excelled in high school mathematics and physics, earned a full scholarship to the Air Force Academy, and graduated third in her class. During her initial flight training, she consistently outperformed her male counterparts in both academic and practical evaluations. Her instructors noted her exceptional spatial awareness, lightning-quick reflexes, and an almost supernatural ability to multitask under pressure, qualities that would prove invaluable in the cockpit of an A-10. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was designed for one purpose: to destroy tanks and provide close air support to ground troops. Unlike sleek fighter jets built for speed and agility, the Warthog was built around its gun, a massive 30mm rotary cannon capable of firing 3,900 rounds per minute. The aircraft could carry up to 16,000 pounds of mixed ordnance, including missiles, bombs, and rockets. Its titanium armor could withstand direct hits from anti-aircraft guns, and its redundant systems meant it could continue flying even with significant battle damage. Flying the A-10 required a unique skill set. Pilots had to fly low and slow, often just a few hundred feet above the ground, making them vulnerable to enemy fire. They needed to identify targets quickly, coordinate with ground forces, and deliver precise strikes without endangering friendly troops. The margin for error was razor-thin, and mistakes could result in catastrophic friendly fire incidents or the loss of aircraft and pilot. Sarah's training began at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, home to the 355th Fighter Wing and the largest A-10 training program in the world. The 6-month course was notoriously difficult, with a washout rate of nearly 40%. Students faced grueling academics, intensive simulator training, and progressively challenging flight exercises. The physical demands were immense. Pilots had to withstand G-forces during aggressive maneuvering while maintaining precise control of their aircraft and weapon systems. From day one, Sarah felt the weight of expectation and skepticism. Her fellow students, all male, watched her every move with mixture of curiosity and doubt. Some were openly hostile, convinced that the military was lowering standards to accommodate women. Others were more subtle in their prejudice, making offhand comments about her size, strength, or emotional stability under pressure. "Look, nothing personal," said Captain Mike Rodriguez, a fellow student who had previously flown F-16s. "But when I'm calling for close air support with my life on the line, I want to know the pilot has the balls to get the job done. No offense. But you're not exactly what I picture when I think of a Warthog driver." Sarah's response was measured but firm. "I don't need balls to fly this aircraft, Captain. I need skill, precision, and the courage to put my life on the line for ground troops. Judge me by my performance, not my gender." The training was relentless. Days began at 05:00 with physical training, followed by academic instruction covering everything from aircraft systems to enemy threats to rules of engagement. Afternoons were spent in flight simulators, practicing emergency procedures and combat scenarios. The simulator sessions were particularly challenging, as instructors would introduce multiple system failures and combat situations simultaneously, testing each student's ability to prioritize, problem solve, and maintain situational awareness. Under extreme stress, Sarah excelled in the academic portions of training, consistently scoring in the top 10% of her class. Her technical knowledge of the A-10 systems was encyclopedic, and her understanding of close air support tactics was sophisticated beyond her experience level. But it was in the simulators where she truly began to shine. While other students sometimes became overwhelmed by the complex scenarios, Sarah maintained an almost preternatural calm, methodically working through problems and finding creative solutions to seemingly impossible situations. The first time Sarah climbed into the cockpit of an actual A-10, she felt a surge of electricity that had nothing to do with the aircraft's electrical systems. The cockpit was cramped and utilitarian, filled with switches, dials, and displays that would overwhelm most people. But to Sarah, it felt like home. The titanium bathtub that surrounded the pilot's seat was a reassuring reminder of the aircraft's legendary survivability, and the heads-up display projected critical flight information directly into her line of sight. Her first instructor pilot was Major Tom Bradley, a decorated combat veteran with over 2,000 hours in the A-10. Bradley had initially been skeptical about training a female pilot, but he prided himself on being fair and objective. "I don't care if you're male, female, or from Mars," he told Sarah during their first briefing. "All I care about is whether you can fly this aircraft safely and effectively. Show me you can do the job and you'll have my full support." Sarah's initial flights focused on basic aircraft handling and familiarization. The A-10 flew differently than any aircraft she had previously experienced. It was stable but sluggish, powerful but unforgiving. The twin engines provided tremendous thrust, but the aircraft's large wing area and heavy weight meant that every control input had to be deliberate and precise. Unlike faster jets where pilots could rely on speed and agility to escape trouble, A-10 pilots had to think several steps ahead, positioning themselves for success while maintaining constant awareness of threats and friendly forces. Third training flight, Sarah experienced her first real test. The weather had deteriorated rapidly, with low clouds and gusty winds creating challenging flying conditions. Major Bradley decided to continue the training mission, knowing that combat pilots often had to operate in poor weather. As they approached the target range, the turbulence became severe, causing the aircraft to buck and roll unpredictably. "Steady on the controls," Bradley instructed over the intercom. "Don't fight the aircraft. Let it settle, then make your corrections." Sarah's hands remained steady on the stick and throttles as she guided the A-10 through the turbulent air. Her breathing was controlled, her movements precise. When they reached the target area, she executed a perfect attack run, placing her practice rounds within feet of the designated target, despite the challenging conditions. Bradley was impressed but tried not to show it. "Not bad, Mitchell. Let's see if you can do it again." Over the following weeks, Sarah's confidence and skill grew exponentially. She mastered the intricacies of the A-10's weapon systems, learning to employ everything from the massive GAU-8 cannon to precision-guided Maverick missiles. Her gunnery scores were consistently among the highest in her class, and her ability to integrate with ground forces during training exercises was exceptional. The real test came during a complex live-fire exercise designed to simulate a combat scenario. Sarah was tasked with providing close air support to a simulated ground unit that was under attack by enemy armor. The exercise required her to coordinate with multiple ground controllers, identify targets in a cluttered environment, and deliver precise strikes while avoiding simulated friendly forces. As Sarah approached the target area, she could see the dust clouds kicked up by the enemy tanks and the smoke markers indicating friendly positions. The ground controller's voice crackled over the radio. "Hog 1 to 2. This is Titan 6. We have enemy armor approximately 800 meters north of our position. Danger close. Say when ready for talk-on." "Titan 6, Hog 1 to 2 is ready for talk-on," Sarah replied, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Hog 1 to 2, from the prominent hill with the radio tower. Threat bearing 350 degrees at 1,200 meters. You're cleared hot." Sarah located the target using her targeting pod and confirmed it was indeed enemy armor, not friendly forces. She set up her attack run, diving toward the target at a steep angle while maintaining situational awareness of the surrounding area. At the optimal moment, she triggered a burst from the GAU-8 cannon, the distinctive BRRRRT sound echoing across the desert as the 30mm rounds found their mark. "Direct hit, target destroyed," came the excited voice of the ground controller. "Outstanding work, Hog 1 to 2. But Sarah wasn't finished. She had identified 2 additional targets and quickly repositioned for follow-up attacks. Within minutes, she had eliminated 3 enemy vehicles while maintaining constant coordination with ground forces. The exercise evaluators were stunned by her performance, which exceeded the standards expected of much more experienced pilots. Word of Sarah's exceptional performance began to spread throughout the A-10 community. Instructors who had initially doubted her abilities were forced to admit that she possessed skills that couldn't be taught: an intuitive understanding of 3-dimensional space, split-second decision-making ability, and the kind of cool-headed professionalism that separated good pilots from great ones. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, the same instructor who had predicted her failure, found himself grudgingly impressed. "I've been flying A-10s for 15 years, he confided to a colleague, "and I've never seen a student pick up the aircraft this quickly. Mitchell has something special." But not everyone was convinced. Some critics argued that training exercises didn't replicate the true stress and danger of combat. They pointed out that Sarah had never faced real enemy fire, never had to make life-or-death decisions with actual lives hanging in the balance. "Let's see how she performs when people are actually shooting at her," muttered Captain Rodriguez, who had struggled with his own training and seemed resentful of Sarah's success. Sarah was acutely aware of these criticisms and the pressure they created. She knew that as one of the first women to fly the A-10 in combat, her performance would be scrutinized more closely than that of her male counterparts. A single mistake could be used to justify excluding women from similar roles in the future. The weight of representation was heavy, but Sarah was determined to prove that gender was irrelevant when it came to flying and fighting. As her training neared completion, Sarah's instructors faced a decision that would shape her career and potentially influence military policy for years to come. Her performance had been exemplary, but deploying her to a combat zone would be a significant step one. That would test not only her abilities, but also the military's commitment to gender integration in combat roles. The assignment orders arrived. On a crisp October morning in 2012, Sarah stared at the official paperwork that would change her life forever. Deployment to Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan, with the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing. She would be flying combat missions in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, the ongoing war against Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. This was the moment she had trained for, dreamed of, and feared. In equal measure, the news of her deployment spread quickly through the A-10 community. Sarah would be the first woman to fly the Warthog in combat, a fact that brought both excitement and trepidation. Supporters saw it as a historic milestone, proof that women could excel in the most demanding military roles. Critics viewed it as a dangerous social experiment that could endanger lives and compromise mission effectiveness. "This is a mistake," declared Colonel Robert Hayes, a retired A-10 pilot who had flown combat missions in the Gulf War. "Combat aviation isn't about equal opportunity. It's about winning wars and bringing our people home alive. The A-10 mission is too dangerous and too important to be used as a testing ground for social engineering." But Sarah's supporters were equally vocal. "Captain Mitchell has proven herself time and again," said Major Bradley, her former instructor. "She's earned this opportunity through skill, dedication, and exceptional performance. Gender has nothing to do with her ability to fly and fight." The debate raged in military publications, online forums, and Pentagon briefing rooms. Some questioned whether Sarah could handle the physical demands of combat flying, the long missions, the heavy G-forces, the stress of being shot at by enemy forces. Others worried about the psychological impact of having a woman in such a traditionally male role, both on her male colleagues and on the enemy forces she would face. Sarah tried to block out the noise and focus on her preparation. She underwent specialized training for the Afghanistan deployment, learning about the specific threats she would face, the terrain she would operate in, and the friendly forces she would support. The mountainous terrain of Afghanistan presented unique challenges for A-10 pilots, with high altitudes affecting aircraft performance and unpredictable weather patterns that could change rapidly. The briefings painted a sobering picture of the tactical environment. Taliban forces had become increasingly sophisticated in their use of anti-aircraft weapons, including shoulder-fired missiles and radar-guided guns. They had also learned to exploit the mountainous terrain, hiding in caves and valleys that provided natural protection from air attack. A-10 pilots had to fly low and slow to be effective, making them vulnerable to these threats. Sarah's squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Chen, was a seasoned combat veteran who had initially harbored doubts about having a female pilot in his unit. However, after reviewing her training records and speaking with her instructors, he had become cautiously optimistic. "I'm going to judge Captain Mitchell the same way I judge every pilot under my command," he told his staff. "By her performance in the cockpit. If she can do the job, I don't care what gender she is." The flight to Afghanistan was long and uncomfortable, with multiple stops for refueling and crew rest. Sarah used the time to review her mission materials and mentally prepare for what lay ahead. She had trained extensively for this moment, but she knew that no amount of simulation could fully prepare someone for the reality of combat. Bagram Airfield was a sprawling complex of runways, hangars, and living quarters that housed thousands of military personnel from multiple coalition countries. The base was surrounded by mountains and operated around the clock, with aircraft arriving and departing at all hours. The constant noise of jet engines and helicopter rotors created a symphony of military aviation that never ceased. Sarah's first impression of the base was its sheer scale and intensity. Soldiers, airmen, and contractors from dozens of countries moved purposefully through the facility, each focused on their role in the massive war effort. The air was thick with dust and the smell of jet fuel, while the distant sound of artillery reminded everyone that this was an active war zone. Her living quarters were Spartan but functional, a small room in a temporary building that she would share with another female officer. The base had been modified to accommodate the increasing number of women serving in combat roles, but the facility still reflected the military's traditionally male-dominated culture. Sarah didn't mind the austere conditions. She had experienced similar accommodations during training exercises and understood that comfort was not a priority in a combat zone. The 455th Air Expeditionary Wing operated at 10s around the clock, providing close air support to ground forces throughout Afghanistan. The squadron flew an average of 40 missions per day, with pilots often flying 2 or 3 sorties during a single 12-hour shift. The operational tempo was intense, with little time for rest or relaxation between missions. Sarah's first briefing with her new squadron was a mixture of professional courtesy and barely concealed skepticism. She was introduced to the other pilots, a mix of experienced combat veterans and newer aviators who had deployed to Afghanistan multiple times. Their initial reactions ranged from polite interest to obvious doubt, with a few pilots clearly uncomfortable with the idea of having a woman in their ranks. "So you're the one who's going to make history," said Captain Jake Morrison, a pilot who had flown over 200 combat missions. His tone was neutral, but Sarah could sense the underlying challenge in his words. "Hope you're ready for what's out there. It's not like the training range back home." Sarah's response was confident, but respectful. "I'm ready to do my job, Captain. I've trained hard for this opportunity, and I won't let the squadron down." The squadron's operations officer, Major Lisa Park, was more welcoming. Park was one of the few women on the base and understood the challenges Sarah would face. "You're going to have to prove yourself every day," she warned privately. "Some of these guys will be waiting for you to fail, and any mistake you make will be magnified because you're a woman. But don't let that pressure affect your performance. Fly your aircraft, support the troops, and let your actions speak for themselves." Sarah appreciated the advice and understood the stakes. She wasn't just representing herself, she was representing all the women who would follow in her footsteps. The success or failure of her deployment could influence military policy for years to come, potentially opening or closing doors for future generations of female combat pilots. Sarah's first combat mission briefing took place at 0400 hours on a cold November morning. The mission briefing room was dimly lit, filled with the low murmur of pilots reviewing flight plans and discussing tactics. The target was a Taliban compound in the Kunar province, where intelligence indicated enemy fighters were planning attacks on coalition forces. Sarah would be flying as wingman to Captain Morrison, whose earlier skepticism had evolved into professional acceptance after observing her preparation and dedication. "Today's mission is a standard show of force with potential for close air support," explained Major Park as she pointed to the mission map displayed on the large screen. "Intelligence suggests 15 to 20 enemy fighters are using this compound as a staging area for attacks on forward operating base Chapman. Ground forces will be conducting the clearing operation, and they've requested A-10 support in case things go sideways." Sarah studied the terrain carefully, noting the elevation changes, potential threat locations, and friendly force positions. The compound was situated in a narrow valley surrounded by steep mountains, creating both tactical advantages and challenges. The confined space would limit her maneuvering options, but the high terrain would provide cover from some enemy weapons. "Weather forecast calls for clear skies but strong winds," continued Major Park. "Visibility should be good, but expect turbulence in the valleys. Rules of engagement are standard positive identification required before engaging, and all strikes must be coordinated with ground forces, Questions? Sarah raised her hand. What's the expected threat level for small arms and RPGs? High, replied the intelligence officer. Recent reports indicate the Taliban have been moving anti-aircraft weapons into the area. Expect multiple 23mm guns and possibly SS-7 shoulder-fired missiles. Stay above 8,000 feet unless absolutely necessary for target identification. The briefing continued for another hour, covering everything from radio frequencies to emergency procedures. Sarah took detailed notes, knowing that her life and the lives of ground troops might depend on remembering seemingly minor details. As the briefing concluded, she felt a familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety that she had experienced during her most challenging training flights. Captain Morrison approached her as they gathered their flight gear. Mitchell, I know this is your first combat mission, but I want you to know that I've been watching you prepare, and I'm confident you can handle this. Just remember your training, stay alert, and communicate everything you see. The ground troops are counting on us. Sarah appreciated his words more than she showed. Despite his initial skepticism, Morrison had become a mentor of sorts, sharing his combat experience and helping her understand the subtle differences between training and real-world operations. Thanks, Captain. I'm ready. The walk to the aircraft was conducted in relative silence, each pilot mentally preparing for the mission ahead. Sarah's A-10, tail number 780651, sat on the flight line like a faithful guardian, its bulk and weaponry a reassuring presence in the pre-dawn darkness. The aircraft was loaded with a full complement of ammunition for the GA-U-8 cannon along. With Maverick missiles and 500-pound bombs out, the pre-flight inspection was thorough and methodical. Sarah checked every system, verified the weapons loading, and ensured that all safety pins had been removed. The ground crew chief, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, had initially been skeptical about working with a female pilot, but Sarah's professionalism and attention to detail had won him over. "She's ready to fight, ma'am," Rodriguez reported as he completed his own inspection. "All systems green, full fuel, and your weapons are hot. Bring her back safe." Sarah nodded her appreciation and climbed into the cockpit. The familiar routine of strapping in, starting engines, and running through pre-flight checks helped calm her nerves. The twin TF-34 engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and she began the taxi to the runway. Morrison's aircraft was already in position, waiting for her to join the formation. The takeoff was smooth, with both A-10s lifting off into the star-filled Afghan sky. As they climbed to cruising altitude, Sarah felt a sense of profound responsibility. Somewhere below, soldiers were preparing for a dangerous mission, and they were counting on her to provide life-saving support if needed. The training was over. This was real combat, with real consequences. The flight to the target area took 45 minutes, during which Sarah maintained constant communication with Morrison and the Airborne Command and Control aircraft. The AWACS controller provided updates on the tactical situation, confirming that ground forces were moving into position and that the target area remained active with enemy personnel. As they approached the Kunar province, Sarah could see the dramatic terrain that made Afghanistan such a challenging operating environment. Jagged peaks rose to over 15,000 feet, with narrow valleys carved by ancient rivers. The landscape was beautiful but unforgiving, with countless hiding places for enemy forces and unpredictable weather patterns that could change within minutes. "Hog 1-1, this is Crowbar 6, came the voice of the ground controller. "We're beginning our approach to the target compound. Request you establish a combat air patrol at 12,000 feet. Grid coordinates 42 SUD 84756, 23,891. Crowbar 6, Hog 1-1 copies," Morrison replied. "Flight of 2 A-10s, playtime 3 hours, full air-to-ground load. We're at your service." Sarah positioned her aircraft approximately 1 mile from Morrison's. establishing a combat air patrol pattern that would allow them to observe the ground operation and respond quickly if support was needed. Through her targeting pod, she could see the compound in question, a collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by walls and defensive positions. Hog 1 to 2, what do you see? Morrison asked over the tactical frequency. Sarah adjusted her targeting pod and studied the scene below. I have eyes on the compound. Multiple buildings, walls approximately 8 feet high, what appears to be fighting positions along the perimeter. I can see movement in the courtyard, looks like 4 to 5 personnel. Copy that. Keep watching and report any changes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The ground operation began with a coordinated assault on the compound. Sarah watched through her targeting pod as coalition forces moved into position, their movements precise and professional. The Taliban fighters had apparently been caught off guard, as there was little initial resistance to the ground assault. But as the ground forces entered the compound, the situation changed dramatically. Enemy fighters who had been hiding in the surrounding terrain opened fire with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. The distinctive crack of AK-47s and the whoosh of RPGs filled the radio as ground controllers called for immediate support. Hog 1 to 1, Crowbar 6, were taking heavy fire from the ridgeline 500 meters north of the compound. We need immediate close air support. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she heard the urgency in the ground controller's voice. This was the moment she had trained for. American soldiers were in contact with the enemy, and they needed her help. Morrison was already positioning for an attack run, but Sarah knew she would need to be ready to provide follow-up support. Hog 1 to 2, I'm going in for the first pass, Morrison announced. Watch for my gun target and be ready to engage the eastern ridge. Sarah watched as Morrison's A-10 dove toward the target area, its GAU-8 cannon erupting in a burst of fire that sent 30mm rounds into the enemy positions. The effect was immediate and devastating. The enemy fire slackened noticeably as fighters scrambled for cover. Good hit, Hog 1 to 1, called the ground controller. But we still have fire from the eastern ridge. Can you engage that position? This was Sarah's moment. She rolled her aircraft into a diving attack, lining up on the eastern ridge where muzzle flashes indicated enemy positions. Her training took over as she configured her weapons, identified the target, and prepared to engage. The enemy fighters were shooting at American soldiers, and it was her job to stop them. Sarah's first combat engagement happened faster than she had anticipated. As she rolled into her attack dive, she could see the muzzle flashes from enemy positions on the eastern ridge. The Taliban fighters were well positioned among the rocks and sparse vegetation, making them difficult targets that required precise marksmanship to engage without risking friendly forces. Hog 1 to 2, you're cleared hot on the eastern ridge, came the ground controller's voice. Friendlies are marked with strobes 600 meters south of your target area. Sarah's training kicked in as she configured her aircraft for the gun run. She selected the GAU-8 cannon, adjusted her aim point, and began her diving attack. The A-10 accelerated as it descended, and Sarah felt the familiar pressure of G-forces as she pulled the aircraft into the proper attack attitude. At 4,000 feet above ground level, she squeezed the trigger. The massive 30mm cannon erupted with its distinctive BRRRRT sound, sending a stream of depleted uranium rounds into the enemy position. The effect was immediate, and dramatic explosions erupted along the ridge as the armor-piercing rounds found their targets. Direct hit. Enemy fire has ceased from the eastern ridge, reported the ground controller. Outstanding work, Hog 1 to 2. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline and satisfaction as she pulled her aircraft out of the dive and climbed back to altitude. She had successfully engaged enemy forces in her first combat mission, proving that her training and preparation had been effective. But there was no time to celebrate. The ground operation was continuing, and she needed to remain alert for additional threats. The mission continued for another 2 hours, with Sarah and Morrison providing overwatch as ground forces cleared the compound and searched for intelligence materials. Several more enemy contacts were reported, but most were resolved by ground forces without requiring air support. Sarah's first combat mission had been a success, but she knew it was just the beginning. Upon returning to Bagram, Sarah was greeted by her squadron mates with a mixture of congratulations and professional assessment. Word of her successful combat debut had spread quickly through the unit, and many of the pilots who had initially doubted her abilities were forced to acknowledge her competence. "Not bad for a first-timer," Captain Morrison told her during the post-mission debrief. "You kept your cool, followed procedures, and put rounds on target when it mattered. That's all anyone can ask for." Lieutenant Colonel Chun was more effusive in his praise. "Captain Mitchell, your performance today was exemplary. You demonstrated the skills and professionalism we expect from all our pilots, regardless of gender. I'm proud to have you in this squadron." But Sarah knew that one successful mission didn't prove anything definitive. She would need to consistently demonstrate her abilities across multiple missions and varying conditions. The real test would come over the following weeks and months, as she flew increasingly challenging missions and faced different types of threats. Her second combat mission came just 3 days later, this time as a single-ship sortie, providing close air support to a special operations team conducting a night raid. The mission was more complex than her first, requiring her to operate in complete darkness using night vision equipment and coordinate with multiple ground units simultaneously. The target was a high-value Taliban commander who was reportedly meeting with other insurgent leaders in a remote village. The special operations team needed to approach the compound undetected, which meant Sarah would have to loiter at high altitude until called upon for support. "Reaper 1-1, this is Hog 2-1, Sarah radioed to the ground team leader. "I'm on station at 15,000 feet with a full load of air-to-ground ordnance, ready to support your operation. Hog 2-1, Reaper 1-1, copy. We're beginning our approach to the target compound. Maintain your position until we call for support." Sarah settled into a racetrack pattern above the target area, using her night vision equipment and sensors to monitor the situation below. The village was small and isolated, with no indication of enemy activity. The special operations team moved like ghosts through the darkness, their movements barely visible even through her advanced imaging equipment. The raid began smoothly, with the special operations team successfully breaching the compound and beginning their search for the target. But as they were preparing to extract, enemy reinforcements arrived from a neighboring village. Suddenly, the quiet night erupted with gunfire as Taliban fighters attempted to surround the American forces. "Hog 2-1, this is Reaper 1-1. We're taking fire from multiple directions and need immediate close air support. Enemy forces are approximately 200 meters north and east of our position." Sarah immediately began configuring her aircraft for close air support, but the situation was complicated by the proximity of friendly forces to the enemy positions. She would need to be extremely precise with her weapons to avoid causing friendly casualties. "Reaper 1-1, I need you to mark your position with IR strobes," Sarah instructed. "The enemy is too close for gun runs. I'll need to use precision ordnance." Sarah selected a 500-pound bomb with a delayed fuse, which would allow her to place the weapon close to friendly forces without causing excessive fragmentation. She lined up on the northern enemy position where the heaviest fire was coming from, and prepared to deliver the weapon. The bomb run required flying straight and level for several seconds while the weapon's guidance system locked onto the target. During this time, Sarah was vulnerable to enemy fire, but she maintained her course and released the weapon at the precise moment for maximum effect. The explosion lit up the night sky as the 500-pound bomb detonated among the enemy positions. The blast was visible from Sarah's altitude, and the immediate reduction in enemy fire indicated that the weapon had been effective. "Great hit, Hog 2-1. That broke up their assault," reported the ground team leader. "We still have sporadic fire from the east, but we can handle it from here." Sarah continued to provide overwatch as the Special Operations Team extracted from the area, ensuring that no additional enemy forces could interfere with their departure. The mission was a complete success, with the high-value target captured and no friendly casualties. Over the following weeks, Sarah flew mission after mission, each one adding to her experience and reputation. She provided close air support to conventional forces, special operations teams, and coalition partners. Her precision with weapons and ability to coordinate with ground forces became legendary within the squadron. More importantly, her consistent performance began to change attitudes throughout the A-10 community. Pilots who had initially opposed women in combat roles were forced to acknowledge that Sarah's gender had no bearing on her effectiveness as a combat pilot. She was simply a skilled aviator who happened to be female. By February 2013, Sarah had flown over 75 combat missions, establishing herself as one of the most capable and reliable pilots in the squadron. Her reputation had spread beyond her immediate unit, with ground commanders specifically requesting her call sign for critical missions. The doubters had been largely silenced, replaced by grudging respect and, in many cases, genuine admiration. Captain Morrison, who had initially questioned her abilities, had become one of her strongest supporters. "I've flown with a lot of pilots," he told Lieutenant Colonel Chun during a routine evaluation meeting, "and Mitchell is in the top 5%. She's got the skills, the judgment, and the courage to handle anything we throw at her." Sarah's success had not gone unnoticed at higher levels of command. Pentagon officials were closely monitoring her performance as part of their assessment of women in combat roles. Her consistent excellence was providing valuable data for policymakers who were considering expanding opportunities for female service members in previously closed military occupations. But Sarah tried to focus on her mission rather than the political implications of her service. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to support ground forces in their fight against Taliban and Al-Qaeda forces. She had developed a reputation for being able to handle the most difficult missions, often flying in adverse weather conditions or complex tactical situations that other pilots might avoid. Her most challenging mission to date had come in January, when she was called upon to provide close air support to a convoy that had been ambushed in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The convoy was trapped in a narrow valley, surrounded by enemy forces on high ground. Weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly, with low clouds and snow squalls reducing visibility to near zero. "Hog 3-1, this is Titan 7, came the desperate voice of the convoy commander. "We're pinned down by enemy fire from multiple positions. We have wounded and need immediate air support." Sarah had fought her way through the weather, using her instruments and terrain-following radar to navigate the treacherous mountain passes. When she finally reached the convoy's position, she found a chaotic scene with enemy fighters firing from concealed positions on multiple ridgelines. The situation required split-second decision-making and precise weapons employment. Sarah had to distinguish between enemy and friendly forces in limited visibility while delivering effective fire support. She made multiple attack runs over the course of an hour, systematically eliminating enemy positions and allowing the convoy to extract safely. "That was some of the finest flying I've ever seen," the convoy commander had reported after the mission. "Captain Mitchell saved our lives today. I don't care what anyone says about women in combat, she's a warrior." Stories like this had become increasingly common, with Sarah consistently demonstrating the skills and courage expected of elite combat pilots. Her performance had helped accelerate the military's integration of women into previously closed roles, providing concrete evidence that gender was not a determining factor in combat effectiveness. But Sarah knew that her ultimate test was still ahead. The Afghanistan deployment was scheduled to continue for several more months, and the operational tempo was increasing as coalition forces prepared for the eventual drawdown. Taliban forces were becoming more aggressive, knowing that time was working in their favor. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were planning a major offensive in the spring, targeting key coalition bases and transportation routes. The attacks would be coordinated and sophisticated, requiring the best efforts of all coalition forces to repel. Sarah and her fellow A-10 pilots would be at the center of the defensive effort. The squadron had been reinforced with additional aircraft and pilots, bringing their total strength to 18 A-10s. The increased firepower would be needed for the challenges ahead, as enemy forces had been observed moving heavy weapons and anti-aircraft systems into the area. Sarah's role in the upcoming operations was significant. She had been selected to lead a 4-ship flight of A-10s that would provide close air support to the most critical ground operations. The assignment was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility, as the lives of hundreds of ground troops would depend on her leadership and tactical decisions. The preparation for the spring offensive was intense. Sarah spent countless hours studying intelligence reports, planning attack routes, and coordinating with ground force commanders. She knew that the enemy would be expecting air support and would have prepared countermeasures designed to neutralize the A-10's effectiveness. The Taliban had been observed deploying SA-7 and SA-18 shoulder-fired missiles, along with 23mm and 37mm anti-aircraft guns. These weapons posed a serious threat to the A-10s, which would need to fly low and slow to be effective in the mountainous terrain. Sarah's squadron mates had noticed her increased focus and intensity as the deployment continued. She was already one of the most dedicated pilots in the unit, but the approaching challenges seemed to have elevated her preparation to an even higher level. "Mitchell's been living in the intelligence shop," observed Captain Rodriguez, who had overcome his initial skepticism about female pilots. "She knows the enemy order of battle better than most intelligence officers. When this thing kicks off, she be ready." The spring offensive began on March 15th with a coordinated series of attacks on Forward Operating Base Chapman, a strategic outpost in the Kunar province. The base housed approximately 800 coalition troops and served as a key logistics hub for operations in eastern Afghanistan. Its loss would be a significant tactical and symbolic victory for the Taliban. Sarah was awakened at 300 hours by the sound of incoming rockets and mortar. The base was under attack, and the enemy had managed to breach the outer perimeter defenses. Ground forces were engaged in fierce fighting throughout the installation, and casualties were mounting rapidly. "All pilots to the Squadron Operations Center immediately," announced the base loudspeaker. "This is not a drill. We have troops in contact and need immediate air support." Sarah grabbed her flight gear and ran through the darkness toward the operations center. The sound of gunfire and explosions was getting closer, indicating that the enemy had penetrated deeper into the base than initial reports had suggested. This was the moment she had trained for. American soldiers were fighting for their lives, and they needed her help. The operations center was a scene of controlled chaos, with officers coordinating the base defense while simultaneously planning air support missions. Lieutenant Colonel Chun quickly briefed the assembled pilots on the tactical situation. "The enemy has breached the perimeter in 3 locations," he explained, pointing to a map of the base. "Ground forces are engaged in close combat throughout the installation. We need to get aircraft airborne immediately to provide close air support." Sarah raised her hand. "Sir, what's the status of our aircraft?" 4 A-10s are mission ready and armed," Chun replied. "You'll be leading the flight, with Morrison, Rodriguez, and Stevens as your wingmen. This is a danger-close situation, so precision will be critical. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as she prepared for what would become the most important mission of her career. The base was under assault, friendly forces were in desperate need of support, and she was being asked to lead the air. Response. Everything she had trained for, everything she had proven over the past months, had led to this moment. The enemy had made a tactical error in their timing. They had launched their attack during the early morning hours when the A-10s were most readily available for immediate response. Sarah knew that the distinctive sound of the GAU-8 cannon would be a tremendous morale boost for the defending ground forces, while simultaneously striking fear into the hearts of the attacking Taliban fighters. As she ran toward her aircraft, Sarah could see the muzzle flashes and tracer rounds from the ongoing firefight. The enemy was closer than she had initially realized, and the situation was more desperate than anyone had anticipated. This would not be a routine close air support mission. This was a fight for survival, and the outcome would determine whether forward operating base Chapman would remain in coalition hands or fall to the Taliban. The stakes could not have been higher, and Sarah Mitchell was about to face the ultimate test of her skills, courage, and determination. The next few hours would either validate everything she had accomplished or become a tragic footnote in the history of women in combat aviation. Sarah's A-10 roared to life in the pre-dawn darkness as explosions continued to rock forward operating Base Chapman. The enemy attack was more coordinated and intense than anyone had anticipated, with Taliban forces using the cover of darkness to penetrate deep into the base's defenses. As she completed her pre-flight checks at record speed, Sarah could see the orange glow of fires burning throughout the installation and hear the continuous crack of small arms fire. Hog flight, this is Crowbar 6, came the urgent voice of the Base Defense Operations Center. We have enemy forces inside the wire at multiple locations. Immediate close air support is requested for sectors Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Friendly forces are marked with IR strobes. Sarah's flight of 4 A-10s taxied quickly to the runway, their navigation lights cutting through the darkness as they prepared for what would be the most challenging mission of their deployment. The base's control tower had been damaged in the initial attack, forcing the pilots to coordinate their takeoff using tactical radio frequencies. Hog 1-1 is ready for immediate takeoff, Sarah announced, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. Flight of 4, full air-to-ground load, ready to support ground forces. The takeoff was conducted under combat conditions, with no runway lights and the constant threat of enemy fire. Sarah's A-10 accelerated down the darkened runway, its twin engines providing the thrust needed to lift the heavily loaded aircraft into the Afghan sky. Within minutes, all 4 aircraft were airborne and forming up for the most critical mission of their careers. As they climbed to altitude, Sarah could see the full scope of the attack on FOB Chapman. The base was surrounded by muzzle flashes and explosions, with enemy forces conducting a coordinated assault from multiple directions. The Taliban had clearly been planning this attack for months, timing it to coincide with a new moon that would provide maximum concealment for their forces. Hog 1-1, this is Titan 7, called the ground force commander. We're taking heavy casualties and need immediate air support. Enemy forces have penetrated our perimeter and are advancing on the command post and medical facilities. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of the situation. If the enemy captured the command post, they would effectively control the base. If they overran the medical facilities, wounded soldiers would be executed or taken prisoner. The stakes could not have been higher. Titan 7, Hog 1-1, were overhead with 4 aircraft ready to engage, Sarah replied. I need you to mark friendly positions with IR strobes and give me priority targets. The ground controller's voice was strained as he responded, Hog 1-1. We have enemy forces approximately 100 meters north of the main command bunker. They're using rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. Our guys are pinned down and can't move." Sarah immediately began configuring her aircraft for close air support, but the situation was complicated by the proximity of friendly forces to the enemy positions. Traditional gun runs would be too dangerous, and precision ordnance would be required to avoid causing friendly casualties. Hog 1 to 2, take the eastern approach and engage targets of opportunity, Sarah commanded. Hog 1 to 3 and 1 to 4, establish a combat air patrol and watch for enemy reinforcements. Captain Morrison, flying as Hog 1 to 2, acknowledged the order and began his attack run. Sarah positioned her aircraft for a precision strike on the enemy forces threatening the command post, using her targeting pod to identify specific targets. While maintaining situational awareness of friendly positions, the first bomb strike was devastating, with a 500-pound precision-guided munition detonating directly among the enemy positions. The explosion lit up the night sky and temporarily silenced the enemy fire, allowing friendly forces to reposition and reorganize their defenses. Direct hit. "Enemy fire has ceased from the northern position," reported the ground controller. "But we're still taking fire from the eastern perimeter. They've got us surrounded." Sarah immediately repositioned for another attack, this time targeting enemy forces that were attempting to breach the base's fuel storage area. A successful attack on the fuel depot would create a massive fire that could consume much of the installation, making it impossible for coalition forces to hold their positions. The second attack required flying directly over the enemy positions, exposing Sarah's aircraft to intense ground fire. She could see the muzzle flashes from multiple anti-aircraft guns as the Taliban fighters attempted to bring down her A-10. The titanium armor around her cockpit was struck several times, but the aircraft continued to fly normally. "Hog 1 to 1, you're taking fire from multiple positions," warned Morrison. "Recommend you climb to higher altitude." But Sarah knew that higher altitude would reduce her accuracy and effectiveness. The ground forces were depending on her for precise fire support, and she couldn't afford to compromise her ability to deliver accurate strikes. "Negative, Hog 1 to 2. I'm staying low for better target identification," Sarah replied as she lined up for another attack run. The third strike targeted a group of enemy fighters who were attempting to plant explosives near the base's ammunition storage bunkers. Sarah's 30mm cannon fire walked through the enemy position with deadly accuracy, eliminating the threat and preventing a catastrophic explosion that could have destroyed much of the base dot as the battle continued. Sarah and her flight conducted attack run after attack run, systematically eliminating enemy positions and disrupting their coordinated assault. The Taliban fighters had initially been confident in their numerical superiority and tactical surprise, but the arrival of the A-10s had changed the dynamic of the battle. "Hog 1 to 1, this is Titan 7, called the ground commander. "Your fire support has been outstanding, but we've got a bigger problem. Intelligence reports indicate enemy reinforcements are moving toward our position. We're talking about company-strength forces with heavy weapons." Sarah's heart sank as she realized the full scope of the enemy's plan. The initial attack had been designed to fix the defending forces in place while larger enemy formations moved into position for a final assault. The Taliban were committing significant resources to this operation, indicating that they viewed the capture of Phobe Chapman as a strategic priority. "Titan 7, how long until the reinforcements arrive?" Sarah asked. "Approximately 30 minutes, came the sobering reply. "We're down to about 50% strength, and we won't be able to hold against a fresh enemy assault without continued air support." Sarah quickly calculated her remaining fuel and ammunition. Her flight had been conducting continuous attack runs for over an hour, and their ordnance was running low. They would need to return to base soon for rearming and refueling, but there were no other A-10s immediately available to replace them. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, with enemy forces continuing to probe the base's defenses, while larger formations approached from multiple directions. Sarah realized that the next phase of the battle would determine whether Fabi Chapman survived or fell to the Taliban assault. The tactical situation at Forward Operating Base. Chapman was becoming increasingly desperate as Sarah's flight continued. Their relentless air support mission. Enemy forces had been reinforced and were now conducting coordinated attacks from 3 directions, testing the limits of the base's defensive capabilities. The defending ground forces, already reduced to half-strength, were running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Hog 1-1, this is Overlord, came the voice of the Regional Command Center. We're tracking multiple enemy formations converging on Phobe Chapman. Intelligence estimates indicate you're facing at least 300 enemy fighters with heavy weapons and anti-aircraft systems. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility as she processed this information. 300 enemy fighters represented a significant Taliban force, one that could easily overwhelm the depleted garrison if they managed to coordinate their final assault effectively. The A-10s were the only thing standing between the base and complete disaster. Overlord, Hog 1-1, what's our support situation? Sarah asked, hoping for word of reinforcements or additional air assets. Hog 1-1, negative on immediate reinforcements. Weather has shut down helicopter operations, and fixed-wing assets are committed to other emergency situations. You're on your own until further notice. The radio silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's flight of 4 A-10s was the only air support available to the 400 coalition soldiers fighting for their lives at Phobe Chapman. The Taliban had timed their attack perfectly, launching their assault during a period when coalition forces were stretched thin across multiple operations. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the tactical frequency. Hog 1-1. I'm down to 200 rounds of 30 millimeters and 1 Maverick missile. Rodriguez and Stevens are in similar condition. We need to RTB for rearming. Sarah checked her own ammunition status and found it equally dire. The continuous combat operations had depleted their ordnance faster than anticipated, and normal procedure would require them to return to base for rearming and refueling. But leaving the base undefended for even 30 minutes could result in its complete capture by enemy forces. Hog flight, this is Hog 1-1, Sarah announced after a moment of careful consideration. I'm going to remain on station and continue providing support with whatever ammunition I have left. You 3 RTB for rearming and return as quickly as possible. Negative, Hog 1-1, Morrison replied immediately. We're not leaving you here alone. If you're staying, we're all staying. Sarah felt a surge of emotion at her wingman's loyalty, but she knew that tactical considerations had to override personal feelings. Hog 1-2, I need you to get rearmed and return with full loads. I can hold them off for 30 minutes, but I'll need your help for the final assault. The debate was interrupted by an urgent call from the ground forces. Hog 1-1, we have enemy forces massing for a final assault on the southern perimeter. They've got mortar and recoilless rifles set up approximately 800 meters from our position. We need immediate air support, or they're going to overrun us. Sarah immediately rolled her aircraft into an attack position, using her targeting pod to identify the enemy formation. What she saw made her blood run cold. Nearly 100 Taliban fighters were positioned in a skirmish line, supported by heavy weapons and prepared to launch a coordinated assault that would likely succeed in breaching the base's defenses. Hog 1-2. RTB now, Sarah commanded. I'm engaging the southern formation. With only 150 rounds of 30 millimeters ammunition remaining, Sarah knew she would have to make every shot count. She lined up her attack run carefully, identifying the enemy's heavy weapons positions as her primary targets. If she could eliminate the mortar and recoilless rifles, The ground forces might have a chance to repel the assault with small arms fire. The first gun run was perfect, with Sarah's 30mm rounds destroying 2 mortar positions and scattering the enemy infantry. But the Taliban fighters quickly reorganized and continued their advance, now only 600 meters from the base's perimeter. "Great shooting, Hog 1-1, called the ground controller. "But they're still coming. We need more fire support." Sarah had less than 100 rounds of ammunition remaining, but she could see that the enemy was committed to their assault. They had come too far and invested too much to retreat now. This would be a fight to the finish. With the survival of Phoebe Chapman hanging in the balance, her second gun run targeted the enemy's command element, which she had identified through their radio antennas and the concentration of fighters around. Specific positions. The 30mm rounds tore through the enemy formation, disrupting their coordination and causing temporary confusion in their ranks. But the Taliban fighters were disciplined and experienced. They quickly adapted to the loss of their commanders and continued their advance, now only 400 meters from the base's perimeter. Sarah's ammunition counter showed only 50 rounds remaining, enough for one more gun run. "Hog 1-1, they're almost on top of us," reported the ground controller. "We can't hold much longer." Sarah made a decision that would define her career and her legacy. With her ammunition nearly exhausted and no other air support available, she would have to use her aircraft itself as a weapon. The A-10 was built to survive battle damage, and its titanium armor could withstand significant punishment. She would conduct low-level strafing runs over the enemy positions, using the psychological impact of her presence to disrupt their assault. "Ground forces, this is Hog 1-1, Sarah announced. "I'm going to make multiple low passes over the enemy positions. Use the distraction to reposition your forces and prepare for their final assault." The first low pass was conducted at less than 100 feet above ground level, with Sarah flying directly over the enemy formation at maximum speed. The psychological effect was immediate. Taliban fighters dove for cover as the massive A-10 roared overhead, its engines creating a deafening noise that could be heard for miles. Sarah immediately pulled up and came around for another pass, this time from a different direction. The enemy fighters were now confused and disorganized, unsure of where the next attack would come from. Some began to retreat, while others continued their advance in smaller, less coordinated groups. "It's working," called the ground controller. "Their assault is breaking up, but we still have enemy forces closing on the eastern perimeter." Sarah's fuel gauge was showing critically low levels, and her aircraft was beginning to feel the effects of the continuous high-G maneuvering. But she could see that her tactics were having the desired effect. The enemy's coordinated assault was fragmenting into smaller, more manageable attacks that the ground forces could handle. As she prepared for another low pass, Sarah caught sight of Morrison's flight returning from their rearming mission. The 3 A-10s were approaching at high speed, their pilots eager to rejoin the battle and support their flight leader. "Hog 1-1, this is Hog 1-2, Morrison called. "We're back with full loads and ready to finish this fight." The return of Morrison's flight marked a turning point in the battle for Forward Operating Base Chapman. Sarah's desperate solo defense had bought the crucial time needed for her wingmen to rearm and return with full loads of ammunition. The Taliban assault, which had seemed unstoppable just minutes earlier, was now fragmenting under the renewed air pressure. "Hog 1-2, I need you to take the eastern approach," Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the exhaustion from hours of continuous combat flying. "Rodriguez, hit the northern positions. Stevens, work the western perimeter. I'll coordinate and engage targets of opportunity." The 4 A-10s spread out across the battle space, each pilot bringing fresh ammunition and renewed determination to the fight. Sarah's aircraft was now running on fumes, her fuel gauge showing less than 20 minutes of flying time remaining. But she refused to leave the battle while her fellow pilots and the ground forces needed her leadership. Morrison's first attack run was devastating, with his fully loaded GAU-8 cannon tearing through enemy positions that had been preparing for a final assault on the base's eastern perimeter. The 30mm rounds created massive explosions as they struck Taliban fighting positions, sending shocked enemy fighters scrambling for cover. "Outstanding work, Hog 1-2, called the ground controller. "Enemy fire from the eastern position has ceased, but we're still taking heavy fire from the north." Captain Rodriguez immediately responded, rolling his A-10 into a diving attack on the northern enemy positions. His precision-guided bombs found their targets with devastating accuracy, eliminating the heavy weapons that had been suppressing the base's defensive forces. Sarah watched the tactical display with professional satisfaction as her flight systematically dismantled the enemy's carefully planned assault. The Taliban fighters, who had been confident in their numerical superiority and tactical surprise, were now facing the full fury of 4 A-10 Warthogs operating in perfect coordination. But the enemy was not finished. Intelligence reports indicated that a reserve force of approximately 100 Taliban fighters was still approaching from the south, equipped with anti-aircraft weapons and determined to capture the base despite the setbacks suffered by their lead elements. "Hog 1-1, this is Overlord," came the voice of the regional command center. "We're tracking a large enemy formation approximately 2 kilometers south of your position. They appear to be carrying SA-18 missiles and 23mm guns." Sarah felt a chill as she processed this information. The SA-18 was a sophisticated shoulder-fired missile system that posed a serious threat to the A-10s, especially if the aircraft were forced to fly at low altitude for close air support. The 23mm guns were equally dangerous, capable of penetrating the A-10's armor if fired from close range. "Overlord, Hog 1-1, what's the estimated time of arrival for the enemy reserve force?" "Approximately 15 minutes, Hog 1-1. They're moving fast and appear determined to reinforce the assault." Sarah quickly calculated her options. Her fuel situation was critical, forcing her to land within the next 10 minutes or risk running out of fuel completely. But leaving the battle space would reduce her flight's effectiveness, just as the enemy was committing their final reserves. "Hog flight, this is Hog 1-1, Sarah announced. "I'm going to attempt a landing at Chapman to refuel. Continue your attacks on the remaining enemy positions and prepare for the Southern Reserve Force." The decision to land at Phobe Chapman was extremely dangerous. The base's runway had been damaged by enemy fire, and there was no guarantee that the airfield would remain operational if the battle continued. But Sarah knew that her leadership and experience would be crucial for the final phase of the battle. "Hog 1-1, this is Chapman Tower," came the voice of the air traffic controller. "The runway is marginally operational, but we're still taking sporadic fire from enemy positions. Landing is at your own risk." Sarah lined up for what would be one of the most challenging landings of her career. The runway was partially obscured by smoke from burning buildings, and enemy muzzle flashes were visible from positions near the airfield. She would have to execute a perfect approach while remaining alert for anti-aircraft fire. The landing was successful, with Sarah's A-10 touching down smoothly despite the challenging conditions. Ground crews immediately began the process of refueling her aircraft, working quickly to minimize the time she would be unavailable for combat operations. As her aircraft was being serviced, Sarah used the opportunity to coordinate directly with the ground force commanders. The face-to-face briefing provided her with detailed information about the tactical situation and the enemy's likely courses of action. "Captain Mitchell, your air support has been the difference between victory and defeat," Colonel James Patterson, the base commander, told her. "Without your leadership, we would have lost this base hours ago." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she knew the battle was far from over. The enemy reserve force was still approaching, and intelligence indicated that they were better equipped and more determined than the initial assault forces. "Colonel, what's the status of your ground forces?" Sarah asked. "We're down to about 40% strength, and ammunition is running low," Patterson replied honestly. "We can hold against small attacks, but if the enemy manages to coordinate their final assault, we might not be able to stop them." Sarah nodded grimly. The next phase of the battle would determine whether Phoebe Chapman survived or fell to the Taliban assault. Her flight of A-10s was the base's primary hope for survival, and she was determined not to let her fellow soldiers down. "Sir, I need 5 more minutes for refueling, then I'll be back in the air," Sarah said. "My wingmen are already engaging the remaining enemy positions and will be ready for the final assault." As she spoke, the sound of Morrison's A-10 could be heard overhead, its GAU-8 cannon firing in long bursts as it attacked enemy positions. The distinctive dorant sound of the 30mm cannon was a reassuring reminder that the battle was far from over. Sarah's aircraft was quickly refueled and rearmed, with ground crews working with practiced efficiency despite the ongoing combat. Within minutes, she was ready to return to the fight, her A-10 once again loaded with a full complement of ammunition and fuel. The final phase of the battle for Phoebe Chapman was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell was determined to lead her flight to victory against overwhelming odds. Sarah's A-10 roared back into the Afghan sky just as the enemy reserve force began their final assault on Forward Operating Base Chapman. The Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a semicircle around the base's southern perimeter, using the cover of a dried riverbed to mask their approach. Their plan was sophisticated and well coordinated, with anti-aircraft teams positioned to engage any aircraft that attempted to disrupt their assault. "Hog 1-1 is back on station," Sarah announced as she rejoined her flight. "What's the tactical situation?" "Enemy forces are approximately 800 meters south of the base and advancing," Morrison reported. "They've got A-18 missiles and heavy machine guns. Stevens took some hits from a 23mm gun, but his aircraft is still flyable." Sarah could see the muzzle flashes from the enemy positions as Taliban fighters engaged the base's defensive forces. The situation was critical. If the enemy succeeded in breaching the perimeter, the base would fall within minutes. Everything depended on the next few minutes of air support. "Hog flight, this is Hog 1-1, Sarah commanded. "We're going to conduct coordinated attacks on the enemy formation. Stay above 8,000 feet until we've neutralized their air defense systems." The first priority was eliminating the SA-18 missile teams that posed the greatest threat to the A-10s. Sarah used her targeting pod to identify the missile positions, which were betrayed by their distinctive heat signatures and the disciplined spacing of their operators. "I've got eyes on 2 SA-18 teams," Sarah announced. "I'm going in with precision ordnance." The attack required flying directly toward the enemy positions, making Sarah's aircraft a tempting target for the missile teams. She could see the infrared signatures of the shoulder-fired missiles as they were activated, their seekers attempting to lock onto her aircraft's heat signature. Sarah's countermeasures system automatically dispensed flares and chaff as she lined up for her bomb run. The first 500-pound bomb detonated directly among the Eastern Missile Team, eliminating the threat and clearing the way for her wingmen to engage at lower altitudes. "Hog 1-2, the Eastern SA-18 team is neutralized," Sarah reported. "You're clear to engage with guns." Morrison immediately dove toward the enemy positions, his GAU-8 cannon erupting with deadly accuracy. The 30mm rounds tore through the Taliban fighting positions, creating devastating casualties and disrupting their carefully planned assault. But the enemy was not finished. The remaining SA-18 team managed to fire a missile at Rodriguez's aircraft, the heat-seeking weapon tracking toward the A-10's engine exhaust. Rodriguez pulled his aircraft into a violent evasive maneuver, dispensing countermeasures and using the mountainous terrain to break the missile's lock. "I'm hit," Rodriguez called over the radio. "I've got engine damage and hydraulic problems. I need to RTB immediately." Sarah's heart sank as she realized her flight was being reduced to 3 aircraft, just as the enemy was launching their final assault. But there was no time to dwell on the setback. The Taliban fighters were advancing toward the base's perimeter, and the ground forces needed immediate support. "Hog 1 to 3, RTB for emergency landing," Sarah commanded. "Hog 1 to 4, take the northern approach. Hog 1 to 2, continue your attacks on the eastern positions." The battle entered its final phase as Sarah's remaining aircraft engaged the enemy reserves in a desperate fight for the base's survival. The Taliban fighters were now less than 400 meters from the perimeter, close enough to engage the defensive positions with rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. Sarah's next attack run was conducted at extremely low altitude, with her A-10 flying just 200 feet above the ground as she strafed the enemy positions. The risk was enormous at that altitude. Even small arms fire could damage critical systems, but the psychological impact on the enemy forces was immediate and devastating. The sight of the massive A-10 thundering overhead at such low altitude caused panic among the Taliban fighters. Many broke cover and began retreating, while others froze in place, unsure of whether to continue their advance or seek shelter. "Keep it up, Hog 1 to 1, called the ground controller. "Their assault is breaking up, but we still have about 50 fighters on the eastern side who haven't given up." Sarah could see the remaining enemy forces through her targeting pod, hardened fighters who were determined to complete their mission, despite the devastating air attacks. These were the Taliban's most experienced warriors, men who had been fighting coalition forces for years and would not be easily discouraged. The final engagement was brutal and decisive. Sarah and Morrison coordinated their attacks to trap the remaining enemy forces between convergent fires, using precision ordnance and cannon fire to systematically eliminate resistance. Stevens, despite his damaged aircraft, managed to contribute by conducting high-altitude overwatch and providing intelligence on enemy movements. The battle reached its climax as Sarah's aircraft, now nearly out of ammunition again, conducted one final low pass over the enemy positions. The surviving Taliban fighters, seeing the futility of their situation, began to withdraw from the area, leaving behind their dead and wounded. "Hog 1 to 1, this is Chapman ground," came the voice of the base commander. "Enemy forces are withdrawing. The base is secure. Outstanding work, you saved our lives." Sarah felt a profound sense of relief and exhaustion as she realized the battle was over. Her flight had successfully defended Phobe Chapman against overwhelming odds, preventing what could have been a catastrophic defeat for coalition forces. The statistics were staggering. Over 200 enemy fighters had been killed or wounded, their assault completely shattered by the precision and determination of 4 A-10 pilots. The base's casualties, while significant, were far lower than they would have been without air support. As Sarah's aircraft landed back at Bagram, she was greeted by crowds of ground crew and fellow pilots who had monitored the battle from the operations center. Word of her heroic leadership had spread throughout the base, and everyone wanted to congratulate the pilot who had led one of the most successful defensive actions of the war. "Captain Mitchell," said Lieutenant Colonel Chun as she climbed out of her aircraft, "what you accomplished today will go down in Air Force history. You've proven beyond any doubt that women belong in combat aviation." Sarah was exhausted, but proud as she reflected on the day's events. She had faced the ultimate test of her skills and courage, leading her flight against overwhelming odds to save the lives of 400 coalition soldiers. The doubters had been silenced forever, and her place in aviation history was secure. But more importantly, she had proven that heroism had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for one's fellow warriors. The A-10 Warthog had found its perfect pilot, and Sarah Mitchell had found her destiny. In the days following the Battle of Fob Chapman, as military historians would later call it, Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm that extended far beyond the military community. News of the first female A-10 pilot leading a successful defense against overwhelming odds had captured the attention of national media, political leaders, and military officials around the world. The official after-action report painted a picture of exceptional leadership and tactical brilliance. Sarah's flight had conducted over 40 attack runs during the 6-hour battle, expending more than 2,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition and 16 precision-guided bombs. The enemy casualty count exceeded 200 fighters, while coalition casualties were limited to 23 wounded and 3 killed numbers. That would have been catastrophically higher without the air support. Captain Mitchell's leadership during the defense of forward operating base Chapman represents the finest traditions of military aviation, wrote Major General Robert Harrison in his official commendation. Her tactical decisions, flying skills, and courage under fire directly resulted in saving hundreds of American and coalition lives. But the recognition went far beyond military circles. Within a week of the battle, Sarah received calls from the Pentagon, the White House, and major news networks requesting interviews. The story of the female pilot who had proven her critics wrong while saving 400 soldiers had become a powerful symbol in the ongoing debate about women in combat roles. Sarah was uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to focus on her mission and her fellow pilots rather than the political implications of her service. During her first media interview, conducted via satellite link from Bagram, she tried to deflect credit to her wingmen and the ground forces who had fought the battle. This wasn't about gender, Sarah insisted during the CNN interview. This was about trained military professionals doing their jobs under difficult circumstances. Captain Morrison, Captain Stevens, and Captain Rodriguez performed with the same courage and skill that I did. The real heroes are the ground forces who held their positions against overwhelming odds. But her attempts to minimize her role only seemed to increase public interest in her story. The image of a female pilot leading a flight of A-10s in defense of American soldiers resonated with a public that was hungry for heroes in an increasingly unpopular war. The political implications were significant. Sarah's success provided powerful ammunition for advocates of expanding women's roles in the military, while forcing critics to confront the reality that gender had no bearing on combat effectiveness. Pentagon officials began accelerating plans to open additional combat roles to women, citing Sarah's performance as evidence that such policies were not only feasible but beneficial. Captain Mitchell has shattered every stereotype about women in combat, declared Senator Barbara Mikulski during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing. Her heroism proves that we have been wasting tremendous talent by excluding women from certain military roles. But not everyone was convinced. Some critics argued that Sarah's success was an isolated case that didn't justify broader policy changes. Others suggested that the media attention was disproportionate to her actual accomplishments, claiming that male pilots had performed similar feats without receiving comparable recognition. Sarah tried to stay above the political fray, focusing on her remaining missions in Afghanistan. But she was acutely aware that her every action was being scrutinized more closely than that of her male counterparts. Any mistake or failure would be magnified and used to justify arguments against women in combat aviation. The pressure was immense, but Sarah found strength in the support of her squadron mates. The pilots who had initially doubted her abilities had become her strongest advocates, understanding better than anyone the skills and courage she had demonstrated during the battle. "I've flown with some of the best pilots in the Air Force," Captain Morrison told a reporter. Captain Mitchell is in that top tier. What she did during the defense of Chapman was nothing short of brilliant tactical leadership. The international response was equally significant. Coalition partners who had been skeptical about American policies regarding women in combat were forced to reconsider their own restrictions. Several countries began examining their policies in light of Sarah's demonstrated capabilities. Sarah's personal life was also affected by the sudden fame. Her family back in Ohio was besieged by media requests, and her childhood friends found themselves being interviewed about her character and motivations. Her parents, who had always supported her aviation dreams despite societal pressures, were proud but concerned about the scrutiny their daughter was facing. "Sarah has always been determined and focused," her father told a local newspaper. "She knew what she wanted to do from a young age, and she never let anyone tell her it was impossible. We're proud of her service, but we're more proud of the person she's become." The psychological impact of the battle and its aftermath was something Sarah had to process carefully. She had faced life-and-death situations for hours, making split-second decisions that affected hundreds of lives. The responsibility had been enormous, and the stress had taken its toll despite her training and preparation. Military psychologists worked with Sarah and her squadron mates to help them process the events of the battle. Combat stress was a normal response to extraordinary circumstances, and even the most experienced pilots needed support after intense combat operations. "What you experienced was the ultimate test of everything you've trained for," Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the base psychologist, explained during one of their sessions. "It's normal to feel overwhelmed by the responsibility and the consequences. The important thing is that you performed exceptionally well under pressure." Sarah found the counseling helpful, but she also drew strength from the knowledge that her actions had saved lives. The ground forces at Fogue Chapman had sent dozens of thank you messages, each one reinforcing the importance of her mission and the difference her leadership had made. One message particularly moved her. "Captain Mitchell, you probably don't know me, but I'm Sergeant Jake Williams, one of the soldiers you saved at Chapman. I wanted you to know that I have a 2-year-old daughter back home who still has a daddy because of what you did. Thank you for being exactly where we needed you when we needed you most." Messages like this helped Sarah understand that her service had meaning beyond the political debates and media attention. She had fulfilled the most fundamental mission of military aviation, protecting ground forces and bringing fellow service members home safely. As her deployment continued, Sarah made a conscious decision to maintain her focus on the mission rather than the controversy surrounding her service. She continued flying combat missions, providing the same level of professional excellence that had characterized her entire career. The other pilots in her squadron took their cue from her example, treating her as they always had, as a skilled aviator and respected colleague. The Battle of Fogue Chapman had changed many things, but it hadn't changed the fundamental nature of military aviation or the bonds between pilots who shared the risks and responsibilities of combat flying. 3 months after the Battle of Fogue Chapman, Sarah was summoned to Washington, D.C. for a series of briefings and ceremonies that would mark the end of one chapter of her career and the beginning of another. The Pentagon had decided to use her success as a catalyst for broader policy changes, and her input was crucial for implementing these reforms effectively. The flight from Afghanistan to Washington was Sarah's first time leaving the combat zone since her deployment began, and the transition from the austere environment of Bagram to the political atmosphere of the nation's capital was jarring. She had grown accustomed to the simplicity of military life in a war zone, where success was measured in completed missions and lives saved rather than political calculations and media narratives. Her first briefing was with the Secretary of the Air Force, who wanted to understand the practical implications of expanding combat aviation roles to women. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being both a policy advocate and a subject matter expert, drawing on her experience to help shape decisions that would affect thousands of future female aviators. "Captain Mitchell, your performance in Afghanistan has provided us with invaluable data about women in combat aviation. Secretary Patricia Williams explained during their meeting. "We're prepared to accelerate the integration process, but we need your insights to ensure we do it correctly." Sarah was careful to provide balanced and objective input, emphasizing that success in combat aviation depended on individual skills and training rather than gender. She advocated for maintaining high standards while ensuring that all qualified candidates had equal opportunities to serve. "The most important thing is that we select and train the best pilots available, regardless of gender," Sarah emphasized. "The mission requirements don't change based on who's flying the aircraft. We need pilots who can handle the stress, make good decisions under pressure, and work effectively as part of a team." The policy discussions were followed by a ceremony at the White House, where Sarah received the Distinguished Flying Cross for her actions during the defense of Fort Chapman. President Obama personally presented the award, using the occasion to highlight the contributions of women in the military and the importance of equal opportunity in national defense. "Captain Mitchell represents the very best of American military service," the president said during the ceremony. "Her courage, skill, and leadership saved hundreds of lives and proved that heroism knows no gender boundaries. She has opened doors that will benefit countless women who follow in her footsteps." The ceremony was attended by Sarah's parents, her squadron commander, and several of the soldiers whose lives she had saved at Fort Chapman. The presence of the ground forces personnel was particularly meaningful to Sarah, as it reminded her that her service had real-world impact beyond the political symbolism. Sergeant Jake Williams, the soldier who had sent her the touching thank you message, was among those in attendance. During the reception following the ceremony, he approached Sarah with tears in his eyes. "Captain, I know I thanked you before, but I wanted to tell you in person," Williams said. "My daughter will grow up knowing that heroes come in all forms, and that courage and skill matter more than anything else. You've changed her world even though she's too young to understand it yet." The media attention surrounding the ceremony was intense, with Sarah appearing on multiple news programs and magazine covers. The story of her journey from doubted trainee to combat hero resonated with audiences around the world, inspiring young women to pursue careers in aviation and other traditionally male-dominated fields. But Sarah was most proud of the practical changes her success had catalyzed within the military. The Air Force announced plans to fully integrate women into all combat aviation roles, while other service branches accelerated their own integration timelines. Training programs were modified to ensure gender-neutral standards and mentorship. Programs were established to support female aviators. The international impact was equally significant. Several NATO allies revised their policies regarding women in combat roles, and military aviation programs around the world began recruiting and training female pilots for previously restricted positions. Sarah's success had created a ripple effect that extended far beyond American military policy. During her time in Washington, Sarah also had the opportunity to meet with young women who were considering military careers. These interactions were among the most rewarding aspects of her newfound prominence, as she could directly influence the next generation of female aviators. "The most important thing is to focus on being the best pilot you can be," Sarah told a group of Air Force Academy cadets. "Don't let anyone convince you that your gender is a limitation. The aircraft doesn't care who's flying it, it only responds to skill and training." Sarah's advice was grounded in her own experience of overcoming doubt and skepticism through performance and professionalism. She emphasized the importance of preparation, mental toughness, and maintaining high standards. Regardless of external pressures, the academic community also took notice of Sarah's achievements, with military colleges and universities inviting her to speak about leadership, decision-making under pressure, and the integration of women into combat roles. Her presentations were carefully crafted to focus on tactical and operational lessons rather than political statements. Captain Mitchell's leadership during the defense of Fort Chapman provides a textbook example of effective tactical decision-making. Noted Colonel, retired James Patterson, who had become a frequent lecturer on the battle. Her ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining coordinated fire support saved the base and demonstrated the highest levels of military professionalism. The Battle of Phoebe Chapman became a case study in military colleges around the world, analyzed for its tactical innovations and leadership lessons. Sarah's decision to remain on station with minimal fuel and ammunition was particularly studied as an example of calculated risk-taking in support of ground forces. As her time in Washington concluded, Sarah faced a decision about her future career path. She had been offered several high-profile assignments, including positions at the Pentagon and opportunities to become an instructor at the Air Force's premier pilot training programs. But her heart remained with operational flying and direct support of combat forces. "I appreciate all the opportunities, but I want to return to operational squadrons," Sarah told her career counselor. "The most important work happens in the cockpit, supporting ground troops and completing the mission. That's where I can make the biggest difference." Her decision to prioritize operational assignments over career advancement opportunities was characteristic of her approach to military service. Sarah had never sought fame or recognition. She had simply wanted to fly and serve her country to the best of her abilities. Sarah's return to operational flying came with a new assignment to the 355th Fighter Wing at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, the same installation where she had completed her initial A-10 training years earlier. But now she was returning as an experienced combat veteran and instructor pilot, tasked with training the next generation of A-10 pilots, including the increasing number of women entering the program. The transformation at Davis-Monthan was remarkable. When Sarah had first arrived as a student, she had been one of only 2 women in the entire A-10 training program. Now nearly 20% of the students were female, and the number was growing steadily as word spread about expanded opportunities in combat aviation. "It's incredible to see how much things have changed," observed Major Tom Bradley, Sarah's former instructor who is now a fellow instructor pilot. "The quality of the female students is outstanding, and they're bringing fresh perspectives to tactical problems. You really did open the floodgates." Sarah's role as an instructor was demanding but rewarding. She was responsible for training both male and female students in the complex art of close air support, drawing on her extensive combat experience to provide realistic and challenging instruction. Her reputation as a combat veteran gave her tremendous credibility with students who knew they were learning from someone who had proven herself under fire. One of her first students was Lieutenant Jessica Chun, a young pilot from California who had been inspired to pursue A-10 training after reading about Sarah's achievements. Chun was talented but struggled with confidence, occasionally doubting whether she belonged in such a demanding program. "I keep wondering if I'm good enough," Chun confided to Sarah during a mentoring session. "Some of the other students have been flying longer, and I feel like I have to prove myself every day." Sarah recognized the familiar doubt that she had experienced during her own training. "That feeling never completely goes away," she admitted. "But it can actually make you a better pilot if you channel it correctly. The doubt keeps you humble and motivated to improve." Sarah's teaching methodology emphasized practical application over theoretical knowledge. She created training scenarios based on actual combat situations she had faced, challenging students to make the same types of rapid decisions required in real-world operations. "In combat, you don't have time to reference manuals or consult with supervisors," Sarah explained to her students. "You have to trust your training, use your judgment, and act decisively. The ground troops are counting on you to get it right the first time." Her most challenging case study was the defense of Phoebe Chapman, which she presented in detail to advanced students. The scenario required them to analyze her tactical decisions, and consider alternative approaches to the same problems. Why did Captain Mitchell choose to remain on station with minimal fuel and ammunition? Sarah would ask, forcing students to think through the tactical implications of risk versus reward. The answers varied, but the best students understood that leadership sometimes required accepting personal risk to accomplish the mission. Sarah used these discussions to emphasize the responsibilities that came with flying the A-10 and supporting ground forces. Outside of her instructor duties, Sarah continued to fly operational missions, participating in training exercises, and maintaining her combat readiness. The A-10 community was evolving rapidly, with new technologies and tactics being integrated into traditional close air support missions. Sarah became involved in testing new, precision-guided weapons systems that would enhance the A-10's capabilities while reducing the risk of friendly fire incidents. Her combat experience made her an invaluable test pilot, able to evaluate new systems from the perspective of someone who had used weapons in actual combat situations. Captain Mitchell brings a unique perspective to weapons testing, noted Colonel David Hayes, the test program director. She understands the practical requirements better than anyone because she's been in situations where equipment failure or malfunction could mean the difference between life and death. The testing program also allowed Sarah to work with engineers and weapons designers, helping them understand the real-world requirements for close air support systems. Her input influenced the development of new targeting pods, communication systems, and defensive countermeasures that would benefit future A-10 pilots. Sarah's influence extended beyond technical matters to broader questions of military culture and integration. She served on committees examining training standards, mentorship programs, and policies affecting women in combat aviation. Her goal was to ensure that future female pilots would face fewer barriers than she had encountered. The most important thing is maintaining standards while eliminating artificial barriers, Sarah explained during a Pentagon briefing on integration policies. We want the best pilots available, and that means evaluating candidates based on their abilities rather than their demographics. 5 years after the Battle of Phobe Chapman, Sarah was promoted to major and given command of an A-10 squadron. The appointment made her one of the youngest female squadron commanders in Air Force history, but more importantly, it recognized her exceptional leadership and operational expertise. Her change of command ceremony was attended by pilots from around the world, including several of the soldiers whose lives she had saved at Phobe Chapman. The event symbolized how far both Sarah and the military had come in terms of recognizing talent and leadership regardless of gender. Major Mitchell represents everything we want in a squadron commander, said General Patricia Williams during the ceremony. She has the tactical expertise, leadership skills, and combat experience necessary to lead an A-10 squadron in any operational environment. As Sarah took command of her squadron, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The doubters who had predicted her failure were long forgotten, replaced by a new generation of pilots who saw women in combat aviation as natural and unremarkable. The transformation was perhaps most evident in the attitudes of the young pilots under her command. For them, Sarah's gender was irrelevant. They respected her for her flying skills, combat experience, and leadership abilities. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable had been completely eliminated. "The best compliment I can receive," Sarah told a reporter during an interview marking her 5th year of service, "is when my pilots forget that I'm female and just see me as their squadron commander. That means we've truly achieved equality." But Sarah's story was far from over. As international tensions continued to evolve and new conflicts emerged around the world, the A-10 community would continue to play a crucial role in protecting American forces and interests. Sarah would be at the center of these operations, leading from the front and continuing to prove that excellence in military aviation had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, courage, and dedication. the young girl from Ohio, who had dreamed of flying, had not only achieved her goals, but had fundamentally changed the landscape of military aviation. Her legacy would be measured not just in the lives she had saved or the barriers she had broken, but in the opportunities she had created for countless women who would follow in her contrails. The story of Sarah Mitchell and the A-10 Warthog had become a testament to the power of determination, the importance of equal opportunity, and the reality that heroes come in all forms. As she stood on the flight line, watching her pilots prepare for their next mission, Sarah knew that the most important chapters of her story were still being written. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.